Hi, and welcome to another episode of Forward Thinking. This time, we're thrilled to welcome folks from Universities Canada's Innovative Designs for Accessibility contest. For the past few years, we've worked with Universities Canada, and they've brought some of their idea winners to the Forward 50 conference in person. And while we can't do that this year, we were thrilled to have the opportunity to bring them on to talk about what they've been doing. Universities Canada is a membership organization that is the unified voice for sort of higher education throughout Canada. And each year they run a competition called the Innovative Designs for Accessibility Student Competition. And it challenges students across Canada to create innovative, cost effective, and practical solutions that knock down accessibility barriers. Since Forward 50 is about making technology better for everyone, or using technology to make society a better place, we thought that it would be a great opportunity to showcase some of the amazing work that these students are doing. And the winners this year are breaking down physical, technological, systemic, and attitudinal barriers to try and make their campuses and their communities more innovative, more prosperous, and above all, more inclusive. So, IDEA has four different categories of proposals: attitudinal and systemic barriers, architectural and industrial design barriers, technological and communication barriers, and virtual learning and distance education. And we're going to talk to the winners from each of those four categories. The first category is an innovation called Closet out of Carleton University, knocking down attitudinal and systemic barriers. It's an innovative labeling system that lets people with visual disabilities manage their clothes more independently. And the winning team is made up of Leanne Amir and Mandy Hui. Please join me in giving a very warm Forward 50 welcome to Mandy and Leanna. Hi.
Hi, Alistair. Thanks for
Hi
having
there.
me on.
So I want to get to the bottom of what you were doing. Let's get started. Mandy, maybe you can tell us how your team identified the problem.
Yeah, so going into this project, this is really a new area for Leanna and I. We started just by delving into what kinds of accessibility problems exist. We started off just mind mapping to learn more about just what kind of accessibility barriers exist in our day-to-day, and which ones we can really tackle with design. So one that really stood out to us was addressing visual disabilities, just because we rely so heavily on our vision every single day to complete these tasks. So what can we do to help those who might not have that same ability? And so through this brainstorm, we ended up going with the direction of helping people with visual impairments with their laundry. How can they sort and wash their clothes more independently? Of course, you can think of issues right away with sorting and using like the laundry machine. But as we kept on designing and talking to people in our target audience, we learned that the problem was a lot bigger than simply just doing laundry and sorting clothes. We learned that there's so many other problems that have to do with identifying colors and matching clothes before even getting to that point of laundry, the simple day-to-day things that we take for granted. So from there, that's really where we kind of kicked off this idea of wanting to design a more holistic system that addresses the problems with not just laundry, but clothes management in general.
And Leanna, do both of you have a design background, or what was it that drew you to this particular problem?
Yeah, so we're both Carleton Industrial Design graduates. We just graduated the past year. And one thing that kind of put us on this path was actually a professor from third year when we started this project. And it was something that she kind of presented to the whole class. She said, there's this competition, it's called IDEA, it's about accessibility. And Mandy and I were always keen on addressing accessibility through different projects. So this is something that we were really keen on tackling together because we're also friends. So yeah, that's kind of how it started. We just kind of looked at each other and we said, sure, let's do it.
So I know in design, we talk about this double diamond of design process, where the first diamond is sort of solve the right problem, and then the second diamond is solve the problem right. And it sounds like you identified so many possible problems in the first phase of this. How did you choose which problem to solve?
Mm-hmm. I would say we were, kind of still discovering like more parts of the problem, even as we got further in that design process. That's funny because you learn that this design process isn't usually linear. There's a lot of hopping back and forth. But yeah, I think eventually we just realized that, our initial direction, which was like just helping people do their laundry was too small of a problem to address. There's so many other greater needs when speaking to our target audience in interviews, like putting together those outfits. And I guess it was really just from those interviews and hearing their expressed, I guess, the biggest barriers to their independence right now, kind of directed what we needed to tackle first.
That's amazing. And I can see it getting into things like fashion sense and design and being able to express yourself, which is really kind of humanizing. It's not just a logistical thing of, not making the colors running your laundry, but actually giving you the sense of a wardrobe, which is amazing. So what were the obstacles you encountered when you were starting to try and put together a solution?
I think for us, neither of us have any visual impairments, and we don't really know anyone in our personal lives who's visually impaired. So part of the struggle for us was determining, what someone with a visual impairment, what would really be useful to them. And in design, we talk a lot about catching ourselves in our own assumptions. And that's something Mandy and we did end up, making assumptions that we realized after talking to someone in the visual impaired community, we were completely wrong. We were totally off the mark. So that was one obstacle for sure. It was such an unfamiliar territory for us. And
Can you give me an example of like an assumption that you found was horribly flawed?
Yeah, sure. One thing that we had integrated into our app was, and we thought this was genius, it's going to be like, it would make everything so much easier, was a voice command system that you would hold the button down on the screen and you'd say, pair this with my pants, for example. And we thought like, oh, this would make it so much easier so that they could, instead of typing things in, they could just talk to their phone. But then after talking to people, they said, well, it's pretty redundant because because of their visual impairments, they already have the native accessibility text to speech already set up on their phone. So they would press the button and it would come out twice because their phone would read it out and then our app would read it out. And then it was just kind of a mess. So that was one of the things that was really like, we thought it would be really cool and we thought it would be a really helpful feature, but it ended up being something that we just scrapped right away.
That's a great example. So what did you wind up building? Like what is the product or the design that you came up with for this prize?
Yeah, so in the end, our, I guess, design is kind of a two-part design. So the first is a clothing tag that's attached during manufacturing. So just like your standard clothing tag you find at the back of your shirt, it has information about like the color, the size and material of the item, but it also has embroidered Braille on it. So that would allow right away for people who know Braille to quickly be able to access that information without someone help them. In addition to that, there would be a QR code embroidered into that tag. So people can use the second part of our design, which is our closet app, to scan that QR code, and that would pull up more information about the clothing's color, again, material, wash instructions, which then can be read using text-to-speech and other accessibility features. So really just surfacing that information and making it more accessible for people with visual impairments. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. How long did the process take from start to finish for you?
Overall, we worked on this project for about a year, but it was really in spurts because we were also in school at that time. So we'd spend like a couple weeks here and then work on it every day and then take a break for school. So then I guess overall, like if you put all the time together, it'd be about 4 or 5 months. But yeah, it was really sparsed out over the period of a year.
And what would you do differently if you could go back and talk to a year ago Mandy? What would you say she shouldn't waste her time on?
Yeah, I think like Leanna said before, we just gained so much valuable feedback during our interviews with people from the visually impaired community. And we really wish that we had spoken with them earlier on. Of course, there were kind of different limitations in the beginning of this project because of time limitations, and also COVID-19 had just really settled in. So, but I think if we had, had that chance to speak early on and really, at that point, start to dig into what like those real problems are, maybe our design could have been more aligned with user needs from the get-go.
For sure. Okay. Well, Mandy and Leanna, we're going to get you back in a little bit for a group chat, but thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
All right. The next category in the idea winners is for architectural and industrial design barriers. And this product is called Slap Bra. It's a novel device that supports ease of dress. If you think about getting dressed and you take for granted the fact that you might have more than one arm to put clothes on, it's pretty easy. But if you have issues with limbs and manipulation and so on, it can be really hard to get dressed. And so the team from the University of Toronto has a product called Slap Bra. It's a fascinating product, and the winning team is Cassie Lee, Luke Sandor, Lynn Lee, and Tiffany Igros. And joining us to have this conversation are Cassie and Tiffany. Sorry, Casey and Tiffany. I got it wrong again. Casey and Tiffany. So hi, Casey. Hi, Tiffany. How are you?
Good. How are you?
So Slap Bra, I think of slap straps when you say that, those little things you put on your wrist as kids. Is this the same kind of idea?
Yeah, that was actually where the idea stemmed from. The slap bands that you used when you were a kid, the watches. And so we thought, why not use it? Why not use a bigger version for the waist to help with dressing a bra?
That's amazing. So tell me, how did you come up with this problem? Like, how did you, there's lots of places where the default world is not accessible to many people. How did you identify this as a place where there was work to be done?
Yeah, so the problem was first identified through one of the clinical experiences from our team member, Lynn. And she worked with stroke patients. And one of the things that really stood out to her was their ability to dress a bra using one functional arm. As we know, stroke patients may have weakness in one of their arms or difficulty with fine motor. We also interviewed one of our team members' relatives who also lived with palindromic rheumatism, so arthritis in their shoulder, to further understand the challenges that come with dressing a bra with one functional arm. And yeah, so we did market research, and we found that there's only two distinct products, the Bra Angel and the Bra Buddy. And based on the overall reviews for these products, we found that a more efficient and effective device could definitely be developed. And so that's where we got the idea from and where we identified the problem.
So Casey, when you set out to do this, there must have been constraints around price and materials and usability and stuff. What were the major constraints to the design that you started with here?
I think one of the things is our team is based off of 4 occupational therapy students. We are from the healthcare world, so we don't have as much experience with the design process and the business aspects of this project. So that was one of the things that we found more challenging, and we need some mentorship and some guidance in those areas.
And so it says in the write-up on the Slap Bra that it's a cost of roughly $20. Did you do any sort of market testing or like research to find out what would make this something that was widely available?
So the materials that we used to make our prototype, we found a yoga slap band at the store. This was something that was used to keep a yoga mat in place, similar to the bracelets, but on a larger scale. And on the market, that was about $15. And then we made little hooks made out of thermoplastic. And that was pretty low in cost as well. So altogether, it came to $20. And currently, we're doing more research on how we can mass produce this. We want to speak to other people about this. That's
great. So without getting too personal, how do you test something like that? Because you're repurposing things from yoga and other tools. You're trying it out. There's a lot of experimentation and sort of iteration to get it right. What was the testing process like, and how did you collect information, and what kind of data were you looking? Was it comfort or ease of deployment, I guess is the right word, of putting it on? And what were the metrics, Tiffany, that you were trying to track when you were measuring if it was effective?
Yeah, so one of the major barriers to conducting user testing was definitely COVID. During our design phase, it was the peak of stage 1 COVID restrictions. So we actually tested it on ourselves. We simulated having one functional arm, and we tested it on our team members. We also did a subjective analysis. So we sent a video to one of our sample representatives. So one of the people that we knew closely who lived with rheumatoid arthritis, and asked for their feedback. And as well, once we started working as clinical students on placement, we reached out to occupational therapists and physiotherapists, and we asked them about constructive feedback. And so essentially we were looking at, is this product, what is the durability and the quality of it? Does it feel comfortable when a person is putting it on? Does it take a lot of energy, and does it facilitate ease of fastening the bra? Because that's something that was very difficult with people with fine motor problems.
And what would you have done differently if you had known these things up front? I mean, other than not having a pandemic so you could go test it, what were the sort of rat holes you went down that didn't pay off as you were doing your experimentation? Maybe Casey, you can answer this one.
I think some of the feedback we got and some things that we wanted to change about our product was that it was not inclusive to people of different sizes, and that this was some of the feedback that we got from the Toronto Rehab, which is the place that we asked for some constructive feedback. So I think going back to the design process when we first made this, we could have had a more broad lens in terms of how we designed the product in the first place.
Did you make any sort of flawed assumptions in your design process? We heard from the earlier team that they were designers and they sort of iterated through this. Were most of your assumptions right, or are there any sort of flaws that you uncovered late in the process that you could have uncovered earlier through research, Tiffany?
Yeah, I think one major thing that we assumed was, it's a slap band. It would be easy to put on, but it's actually not that easy. It does take some practice and some getting used to, but definitely usable. We also assumed that unraveling the device, or we found out later on, that unraveling the device isn't as easy as it would be with one arm as well. And so identified that as something that we would definitely work on if we were to put it out in product. So like designing an accessory that would help to unravel the product with one arm.
Got it. Do you have plans to commercialize this further, Casey?
That's something that we're talking to the team about currently. We're not really sure where our future steps will take us, but we're excited to continue working on the project.
Awesome. And I think just the project showcases how much we take for granted things that many people can't. And that kind of design thinking has to find its way. I like the fact that it's coming from occupational therapists, not designers, that you're bringing it from your world back to like, how could we design a project that way? So congratulations. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the next category in these awards is the overcoming technological and communication barriers. And the team, we're going to be speaking to Mitali and Lillian, have a 3D drawing toolkit for blind and partially sighted drawers. Because if you're blind or have low vision, then being able to draw well in different situations obviously is vital, but extremely difficult to do. So how do you use multidimensionality and haptic feedback to allow people to draw things and create designs? And the winning team here is Mitali Kamat and Lillian Fan. So Mitali and Lillian, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Alistair. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here. So I love this idea. I think that the idea of being able to express yourself, particularly in digital media and in multidimensional media, is something that as we become sort of digital creatures and communicate so much and express ourselves, has the risk of dramatically widening the gap between those who can access information and communicate and those who can't. So in your case, maybe Mitali, you can tell me a little bit about what the toolkit is, and then we'll get into how you kind of came up with the idea.
Sure. Yeah. So this came out of the major research project I was working on as a part of my inclusive design program at OCAD. And the project is essentially, the design is, I can split it up in two parts. And one is the 3D drawing toolkit, which is the analog component. It consists of geometric tiles with magnets that you can snap together. It also consists of multiple flexible components like wax sticks, Play-Doh, other aspects that you can use to build product 3D models. And it also consists of a digital scanning app, which allows the user to scan the geometric components and simultaneously creates a virtual model that they can share with sighted users.
So build it in the 3D world using analog tools, and then bring it into the digital world as a sort of digital framework. Lillian, how does the person know that the thing they've created has been successfully reproduced in the virtual version?
So there will be some audio response inside the tools, and like when they scan the tools, like scan the piece, and the audio will say like the something being scanned, like the triangle being scanned, and like after they finish scan, they will like the audio will say like there will you can click on the screen and to generate the 3D model, and after user click, and the audio will also tell user like the 3D model is generated.
So it provides some amount of feedback. Now, I noticed in the
Yeah.
description for your project that there's something called a raised line drawing toolkit. Mitali, can you explain what that is?
Sure. So this is Raceline graphics or Raceline toolkits are what are commonly or commercially available right now. They're the most commonly used method for converting visual graphics and making them accessible for blind and partially sighted. However, despite this, there's not a whole lot of representation for blind and partially sighted in, say, STEM education. So we wanted to explore why that is, and if, say, someone who's a blind user who has never been exposed to sight early on, can they still build mental models using just a raised line graphic?
So when you say build mental models, you mean like come up with an idea in their head of something that's represented visually?
Yeah, so if, say, I was building a perceptual model of a triangle, I know what a triangle looks like. I know that has three lines, and I can maybe use wax sticks to make those three lines. But if I had never been visually exposed to what a triangle looks like, how will I understand what a triangle is? I guess
I guess that
that's
starts to border on philosophy, right, Lillian? Like the question of knowledge and epistemics and stuff. So Lillian, how did you go about trying out this? Obviously, you have lots of physical things, but as some of the other winners have mentioned, it was COVID. How did you go about testing these things out?
So for the testing stuff first, like as like I'm more focusing on the technical part. So when I build the software, the tool, like I always test by myself. Also sometimes like I just cover my eye to pretend like I can see, and like test if I can understand things. And for the user test part, I like Metally did most the user test part if you want to.
Ye-
Yeah.
yeah, I
So,
can talk
so
about it.
yeah, before we get to you, Mentali, Lillian, you're doing the first usability testing by just essentially putting on a blindfold.
Mhm.
What did that change how you perceived people who have issues with sight? Like, did that change how you felt about their lives and their world?
Yeah, it's really different. Like they need use like they need like try to touch and feel like what the shape is that piece, and to put them together also like harder because like they need to like very like to connect each piece will be like harder for them to doing that.
Yeah, Natalia, I once went to one of those blind dinners. It was a fundraiser for someone who was blind and needed surgery, and everybody put on a blindfold and they served food, but everyone at the table had to cooperate. So you had to like figure out how to pass the bread and stuff. Definitely pre-COVID, but it was such a remarkable experience to. I mean, I would say it opened my eyes, but that's horrible phrasing. But it was such an incredible experience to go, wow, I took all these things for granted. And we've heard, through the past two contestants, not being able to put on a bra because you might not have the use of both of your limbs, or not being able to put together your wardrobe because you can't tell what your clothes are. We take so many of these things for granted. Um, can you tell me, in a professional sense, if something like this exists, if you have a better way for people to draw in 3D, how does that change the careers that people who are blind or partially sighted can explore, and how does that change sort of inclusion and the roles they can play in society now with these new tools?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gives a lot of access to higher education. Just awareness of what kind of industries they can and cannot access right now with the barriers that are in place, especially COVID. I think that was everything moved to virtual, and we say a lot of things like, oh, I'm going to hold this up and explain this aspect of the brain, but okay, but how does someone who is blind and partially sighted access that? So I think I would say what we explored largely was STEM. And even though, Lillian talked about blindfolding, that experience is not close to, someone with lived experience
Well,
without
presumably
vision.
Lillian has an idea what a triangle is before using the tool,
Yeah,
like, or whatever.
yeah,
You're bringing
absolutely.
preconceived models that you can expand on.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the two blind and partially sighted users that we worked with over this period of 18 months, they were both from a design background, and then it was very important to them to access drawing tools, and so having sort of first-hand experience that they had in co-designing with them was kind of made us more aware as to which fields are still not accessible, and hopefully some sort of way that this tool will help move that forward.
Amazing. Thank you. And I'm going to bring up our last of the 4 groups before we get back together. So we'll see you 2 in a couple of minutes for a group discussion. So the 4th category for these awards was virtual learning and distance education. And first place was a project called Side by Side that came out of Brock University. And the team here is a pretty big team. I'm going to welcome 2 of them, but the team as a whole was Michael Zutautas, Aaron Wexler, Aki Laidlaw Allen, Leona Noble, Nikki Nguyen, Sydney Hollander, Roxana Gilgore, and Jessica Dabrowski. And we are going to be joined by Michael and Aki. Hi.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
You've even got shirts. You're really taking this seriously.
Yes.
So this basically talks about communities online and the barriers to adults who identify as physically, mentally, or neurodiverse exercising social opportunities. Can you tell me, first of all, why does the current online world suck for people who don't fit the sort of default definition of a community?
So, similar to being in person and facing, an in-person facility for exercising, if you're looking to meet people, to have a like-minded exercise session with, or talk with, there's a lot of just typical barriers, whether it's just boring, it's too difficult, whether you have technological barriers in terms of not knowing how to use these platforms and different services. Also, people aren't sure of knowledge and assistance and like how to properly interact in a lot of cases in these sort of group sessions. So the online platform, there isn't a lot of handholding and not a lot of opportunities, in the sense that it's just more challenging, that coming from an ableist perspective, that you wouldn't necessarily see unless you actually reach out and learn from these people.
So, Aki, presumably there are tons of problems in helping everybody to be able to enjoy the benefits of technology. How did you go from, hey, tech sucks for people, to here's a specific problem or a specific domain that we can try and improve?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of it was the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, it put a halt on our regular in-person side-by-side program. And we thought, wow, these people are already at a disadvantage. We have neurodiverse people being at a disadvantage for exercise, meeting physical activity recommendations. And then you take the COVID-19 pandemic and put even more barriers in place. And we just thought we need to do something about this. So why not start something online?
I don't want to cut you off, but maybe I asked the question in the wrong order. Can you tell me more about the side-by-side program before we get into what stopped working? Because that tells me how you narrowed the problem down. It was right in front of you. So what is side-by-side?
Side-by-Side is now an online platform for individuals to both socialize and do exercise programming in group sessions or in individualized one-on-one sessions. So it started out in person at a facility in Niagara Falls. And now we've moved online. So we're kind of broadening our horizons here. And it's for individuals with cognitive disabilities and with motor disabilities.
And got it. So this was a program that was happening in Niagara. And was this something that was supported by the university, or did they sort of reach out and say, we need help?
Yeah, so this was a program run through Brock University by under the professor, Dr. Connolly. It was a program started a few years beforehand. And as Aki was saying, it was just based off of these individuals who needed embedded curriculum, so specific activities which target like motor development milestones that aren't necessarily met for a lot of these individuals. So we'd have a lot of different stations and different activities which targeted very specific motor development milestones. I can like read off a few. They're really complicated, some of them, but like midline crossing, pushing and pulling, moving from side to side, propping yourself up, all these different motor milestones that were really important to target.
And so, Aki, if I understand correctly, coming back to your answer, this was about, the problem was right in front of you because you had a program that the university used to support that went away. What was difficult about moving to a virtual world? Because from Peloton to Nordic Track, everybody sort of moved online, but that was definitely not an easy thing to do if you weren't familiar with technology or were differently abled in some way. So when you sat down and said, like, how do we reproduce this online? What made it much more complicated than just simply firing up Zoom and telling people to, clear an area in their room?
Absolutely. Yeah. So number one would be equipment. What equipment are we using? Because they are at home. Everybody's at home. So basically what we did there was added some accessible equipment options, towels, cans, body weight, sitting in chairs so that we're not putting anybody at risk. And then at number two would be just the educational aspect of how do we get people online. So that was a learning curve as well.
What was the hardest part about getting people online?
Teaching them how to use Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Yeah.
And
Michael, does the broadband and the infrastructure exist in most of these places already?
Typically, a lot of the people that we have, they either come from a home where they live with family or relatives or a community center, and they do have internet. But just to add on a bit to that last question, motivation also was a very big issue. We found that a lot of times it is difficult to get people to use the resources they have to exercise when they can if they're not as interested. So we always had to find different ways to make it engaging and make it interesting and valuable. And that's where we also incorporated a lot of the social component as well, just because the social component helps making it a very universal and holistic program.
So when you did this, were you able to track any metrics for like how much people improved or how engaged they were physically versus virtually? Because as we've seen, like the lemon of COVID kind of gives us lemonade in terms of some of the new tools and changes that can be made. Do you have any metrics for how well this worked virtually versus in person?
We didn't really do any sort of metrics or anything like that. For us, we just really wanted to offer everyone an opportunity to just have a social and physical activity outlet. Of course, we would love to work with these people in person like we did in the past and see like really significant improvements in that way. However, to do that same activities requires a lot of supervision and safety and equipment that just simply these people aren't going to have at their home. So I wouldn't say the goal was as much metrics and statistics, but more so just quality of life and helping these people through this difficult time for everyone. But that's definitely a great thing that we could look to in the future, maybe.
So Leanna, just to wrap up, do you think this is something that you will continue to offer virtually even as the world makes it okay to do it in person again?
Yeah, for sure. Because there were a lot of, we actually found that with this shift to a virtual setting, it removed the entire barrier of trying to get to a facility in the first place, which can be very hard for people with motor disabilities specifically. So we had a lot of issues with the transportation system. It's unreliable in really any area. It's unreliable to try to get people, they could be hours late. So it was great, and I really think that it's going to continue for a long time being online.
Awesome. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to play a game. We're going to see if I can bring everybody back on stage or on screen, and we'll see how well this works. Okay, so now we're going to switch to Popcorn, which is a fun kind of informal way to have a quick conversation between all of you. First of all, congratulations, all of you, on winning these awards and really pushing the envelope of what's possible, particularly in the time of COVID. So I think what's common across all these themes is that you've had to design not only in a situation where you may not understand the subject or the user here. You may try to put on a blindfold, but you can't possibly understand what it would be like to never have seen a triangle, for example. But also you've had to do that in really creative ways using technology that people might not have done so in the past. That's changed how you can research and innovate. So I'm going to start with Mandy. Mandy, what is the one thing that you've learned from doing this kind of work during a pandemic where we're reliant on tools that you hope will stick with the way that we design and innovate for the margins going forward?
Yeah. So I think for me, I think a lot of us said it at first, the barrier, one of the barriers was just being able to connect with people from our target audience. But now with COVID, and immersed in this world of video call, it's actually so easy to be able to connect with those people. So I think it's really important to speak with your user group early on so you can really understand the problem from their perspective, empathize with them, and actually know kind of what direction you have to go into while you're designing. So I hope this ongoing communication, whether in person or on video call, is something that continues. I will popcorn over to Casey.
Hi. So I think one thing that was nice about being able to connect with everyone virtually. So our team, when we were working on this project, we were all students, and we were actually in different locations, so in different parts of Ontario, and I was in BC, but we were still able to connect with each other and have meetings. And I just think it's nice to be able to connect people from further areas. And I hope that that's something that can continue. And I'll popcorn it over to Michael.
Okay, so I think the biggest takeaway and thing that we've learned from Side by Side is that we want people to not make decisions on behalf of people with individuals with disabilities, and get direct consultation from them rather than just making assumptions on their behalf. We learned so much through just trial and error and speaking directly to the population, whether it was Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, intellectual motor impairments. Speaking with them directly and learning from them directly is the best way to tackle these problems rather than making assumptions for them. And I'll popcorn it off to Lillian.
So during this pandemic, me and friend also to communicate not only this kind of meeting chat with camera. We also tried some VR tools, and each person can have an avatar and to talk together like the real world, and that is really fun. I want that to be continued. So I would popcorn to Liana.
Hi. So I think doing this project in the pandemic, between Mandy and I, a lot of our work was graphic, and a lot of it had to be done over softwares like Figma, and we had to find ways that we could show each other concepts really quickly and generate things really quickly, but you had to do it so that people could see it live. And that was also something that, like, in the future in user testing, I think that could be really, really useful in just having, we're all in design, we do a lot of like co-design sessions where you can give your participants something and have them manipulate it. And that was sort of taken away from us in COVID, but it can also, with these softwares that, if you just practice that and you learn how to set up for other people, you can really get valuable feedback from not only just listening to them, but also having them manipulate things on the screen. And like other people were saying, COVID kind of opened up, the barriers of like just being restricted to people in your specific location. So now you can access people on other sides of the world and not only talk to them, but with softwares, you can have them do things for you and, make them your guinea pigs in a sense. So I will popcorn it off to Tiffany.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from this project, and like others were mentioning from doing it within COVID, was because we weren't able to do user testing, was we had to test our product on ourselves, and to be able to, try and simulate what their experience and try to empathize what they go through every day. I think that's the biggest takeaway that I've taken from this project, is just trying to have the empathy and trying to understand from their situation, and working with our team to try and develop a device that would help them, do things that are meaningful to them, and something that we take for granted every day. And I'm going to popcorn to Aki.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of good points made already. But definitely one thing that I have to say is that I hope that we continue to consult with people with disabilities, consult them individually when it comes to these ideas that we have, just because it's important that we get all of their input, because every disability is very different. And I just hope that we continue doing online programming and things like that to remove these barriers that people with disabilities face. And I will popcorn it to Mitali because she's the only person left.
I would say sort of a more practical learning for me was don't make assumptions about technology that works for individuals with blind and partially who are blind and partially sighted. A lot of video conferencing tools that have articles saying that they're accessible and they work great. So I think my biggest learning lesson was just asking, what works for you, what assistive technologies are you using, and let's set up accordingly. I think I would say that.
Awesome. And I like the circle gets a square kind of Hollywood Squares format that we've got going here. Well, thank you all so much for sharing those stories with us. I think we covered a lot of topics in a short amount of time. Congratulations to all of you for working on this stuff. Obviously, one of the things that's really different from government and the private sector is that in the private sector, we tend to design a product for a lucrative target market that's homogeneous, whereas government is able to design for the margins and the things that are heterogeneous. As you said, no two disabilities are different, are the same, but the nature of not being part of the default population is something that has in common. And so thank you all so much for sharing some of those stories and shedding some light on the many ways that you've been pushing forward on inclusion and accessibility, and frankly, innovating that stuff. It's great to see the stuff being built by the next generation of Canadian entrepreneurs. And I love that you're coming here with perspectives from design thinking to software engineering to occupational therapy, because this is really how these changes are going to get made. So congratulations to all of you. And thank you so much for being here today.